It might be obvious by, well, everything, but this year has been garbage. I think the fact that I haven't been to an anime convention since late 2019 should tell you all you need to know about my white-hot rage. I went from attending 5 or 6 cons every year to none in the absolute abomination that was last year, so theoretically, I should have had plenty of time to watch anime, right? I mean, yes and no. I think I followed one series in the winter season, which was if my favorite pop idol made it to the Budokan, I would die, an adorable take on the idol genre that followed the fans as much as the idols themselves, which was a nice touch. I tried a little harder in the spring season, and while I wasn't doing too bad with titles like Kishigoto and Weebs Listen to Me, at some point I just fell off the wagon and resorted to binging the last handful of episodes after they ended. I tried yet again with the summer season because, as you might be aware, there weren't as many titles as usual due to the aforementioned plague, but no dice. If it's any consolation, I was able to watch Rent a Girlfriend, the entirety of my teen romantic comedy Snafu, and the first half of the long-awaited second season of ReZero after all 3 had come to an end. It would only hit me as I was writing this video that each of the series mentioned here should be banned worldwide for neglecting the objectively best girls. In any case, I wanted things to be different with the fall season, so I kind of watched a lot. In this video, I'll be discussing the best and worst of what this season had to offer, starting with those I dropped. In what would become an unexpected trend this season, we have a series based on a mobile game, King's Raid Successors of the Will by OLM and Sunrise Beyond, but don't let the fact that it was created by a subsidiary of the studio behind Cowboy Bebop fool you. This series is nothing more than an incredibly bland medieval fantasy. I suffered through 2 episodes before the overly convoluted exposition and insipid characters began wearing on my patience. I can't even begin to tell you what it was about without looking it up. It left that little impact on me. I do, however, appreciate the use of Pripside in the OP, but not even that can salvage a boring series, sadly. By the grace of the gods, or as I prefer to call it, that time I got reincarnated as a slime caretaker, is really only on my drop list because in the 2 episodes I watched, it didn't feel like it was really going anywhere I would be interested in. It follows Ryoma, an office worker who dies in his 30s, and in order to make up for that misfortune, the trio of gods reincarnate him into a fantasy world. Instead of taking this opportunity to live out his power fantasy, as many other protagonists might, he decides to live a life of solitude, raising and taking care of slimes. As I said, it's not that I necessarily disliked what I saw of this one, it just didn't feel like something I would want to invest in, especially when there were a ton of series that seemed more interesting. Our Last Crusade, or The Rise of a New World, produced by Silver Link, reminds me of King's Raid in that I pretty much knew I would not be witnessing this one to completion. It had this incredibly obtuse backstory that gave me no reason to care, and the uninspired Romeo and Juliet angle they were obviously building up to just didn't seem all that interesting to me. I ordinarily don't mind the handful of short-form anime each season as they never take as long to sit through as a full series, but I may have met my match with Rail Romanesque. Based on a visual novel called My Tetsu, Rail Romanesque appears to borrow the characters from its source material and throw them into a bunch of slice-of-life moe blob situations. If you've read My Tetsu, and if you like anime where things that ordinarily aren't human are human, you might be able to enjoy the short-form exploits of the train lollies, but I was most certainly not one of those people. In the late 2000s, Kyoto Animation shook the world with Lucky Star, and ever since then, studios across Japan have been trying to replicate that success with varied results. In the case of Studio Gokumi, who have had lightning strike more than once in the form of Surezure Children and Yuki Yuna is a Hero, they tried and failed, in my opinion, with Maisetsu opening act. I'll admit, this might be one of those situations where I should watch more than the first episode, as based on that alone, it was lacking something. A sense of heart you might expect a series about a group of aspiring entertainers to have. It could be that I'm being unfair here, but considering the sheer amount of anime to consider this season, there is no room to keep up with titles that fail to command my attention, for better or worse, as we'll find out a little later on. In recent years, there have been dark forces at work, trying desperately to get me to care about Webtoon. It started with the adaptation of Tower of God, which, while I haven't yet finished it, was admittedly interesting. I never did make it more than one episode into God of High School, and based on what I've heard about the series' overall quality, it may remain that way. I wanted to like the third of the Crunchyroll x Webtoon collaborations, noblesse, but the more I watched, the more I was convinced this is a story that is probably best consumed in its original format. I started watching the series with the first episode, as logic would suggest, but it seemed confusing, for lack of a better term. I discovered the first episode is set about 90 chapters into the manhwa, and the missing story can be found in an OVA produced back in 2016, Noblesse Awakening. So, following the first episode, I decided to go back and watch that. I ended up dropping the series after I had fulfilled the 3-episode rule, as while I was slightly interested in the story and found a chuckle or two from the comic relief, there wasn't much that made this one worthy of keeping up with. I can recall, like many of you can, waking up in the middle of the night, a room enveloped in darkness, the only source of light and sound coming from the ending credits to Inuyasha, as it aired on a primordial Adult Swim. I could lose what small amount of cred I have, but I'll admit that this is more or less the extent of my experience with Inuyasha. It just never interested me enough to sit down and watch nearly 200 episodes. I can barely find motivation to catch up with Black Clover, and that's a series I want to catch up with. I thought, that being said, maybe I could find it within myself to watch the sequel series to Inuyasha, Yashahime, Princess Half Demon, as it aired. I could not. It wasn't necessarily unwatchable, but the thought that this series could easily reach 100 or more episodes made me immediately lose interest about 3 weeks in. If you are someone who adored Inuyasha, there's a decent chance you'll adore Yashahime, but if you are not fueled by the simultaneously regenerative and degenerative properties of nostalgia, then this might be one to pass up on. I am but a solitary man, y'all. I am only capable of watching so much anime before I vanish into the ether, never to be seen or heard from again. As such, there were several titles I just could not bring myself to watch in season, instead opting to save them for a rainy day in about 30 or 40 years as I am desperately escaping the armed drones owned by Shmamazon and its founder Shmev Shmezos. In this segment, we'll be trying to trim down on the length of this video by giving a haiku to each of the titles that I put on hold. Ready? Go. Oh, Hypnosis Mike. It was good, but I don't want to watch it right now. I'm Standing on a Million Lines is a decent, but flawed isekai. Ikebukuro. It looked like Durarara, with no Durarara. Kuma times 3 Bear was cute, I have to admit. Maybe sometime else. If Blade Runner had a bastard child, it would be Akudama Drive. Adachi needs to hurry up and confess to Shimamura, please. If you expected Sherlock, it looks like you run all out of Sherlock. It's finally time to breach the true topic of today's video, which is, anime I loved. Or, at least, anime I completed this past season. I managed to somehow narrow it down to a short list of 12 anime I simply couldn't ignore. In the realm of things I never expected in a million kajillion years, we have a remake of the classic horror anime Higurashi When They Cry New, which decimated my expectations when it was revealed not only to be a sequel to the original rather than simply a remake, but it was being renamed from Higurashi When They Cry New to, get this, Higurashi When They Cry Go. In my last video, I said, I can't say anything definitive about the series airing this season, at least not yet, but I may be back with another video on it if it ends up being more than just a milquetoast retreading of old territory. And for the most part, that's exactly what this supposed sequel has been. In the second episode, it is confirmed that the Rika present in this series is the very same Rika as in the original, and for some reason, that still hasn't even been touched on, she is being forced back into the time loop. It doesn't feel like a retread in all aspects, however. I won't spoil who the culprit was in the original, but I have a sneaking suspicion that they're blameless in this series, and the true culprit is someone I couldn't begin to assume, at least with the limited information we have so far. I am not entirely convinced this series needed to happen. It looks so much better than the original by Studio Dean, but aside from some slight changes to the storytelling of each new arc, it doesn't seem to provide anything new for existing fans of the franchise. This could change as the series proceeds into the second half, as it seems the first half was an abbreviated summary of the first and second series combined, so things might start going off book in the coming weeks. Upon hearing that an adaptation of Jujutsu Kaisen would be among the offerings this fall, my curiosity piqued. It seemed, at first glance, like it would be the next big sleeper hit from Jump, and any time I saw it being discussed online, it had a fair amount of hype attached to it, so I would be lying if I said my expectations hadn't skyrocketed. It reminded me of how I felt about Black Clover. I dropped it 3 episodes in, and damn, I wish I hadn't, so I stuck with Jujutsu Kaisen through its first core, which was somehow slow as molasses and rushed beyond comprehension. It follows Itadori Yuji, a compassionate and kind young man who, following the death of his grandfather, is swept up into a war between spiritual creatures known as curses and the Jujutsu sorcerers who exorcise them. In the first couple of episodes, we're introduced to our core cast of characters aside from Yuji: the brooding Fushiguro Megami, the excitable Kugisaki Nobara, and their enigmatic teacher Satoru Gojo. What's more, we find that after participating in cannibalism, Yuji is now a vessel for an ancient demon who, though he seems hell-bent on taking over his body, isn't against offering a spot of help in rare instances if he's feeling generous. I am enjoying the character designs, the music, and the rustic, almost old-school vibe the animation gives off, but the story feels like nothing more than a traditional shonen in my opinion. I wasn't as loyal with this one as with others, and despite my seeming enjoyment, it was kind of a chore to catch up, which is never a good sign. It seemed like MAPPA had a roadmap of sorts that illustrated where they wanted to be by the end of the first core, so it felt like there were important elements that were swept under the rug in the last few episodes, and as such, the impact is mute. It could be that, rather than continue with the anime, I may opt to read the manga instead, as I do find myself enjoying the concept. I'm just unsure of how I feel about this particular adaptation. I've made it no secret that I have an irrational appreciation for the fall 2017 anime season. It was a season that brought us more bangers than a back alley dealer, and we were hooked. Blend S, Inuyashiki, A Sister's All You Need, Anime Gataris, the list goes on and on, but one series left an indelible mark on me long after it finished airing. Kino's Journey, The Beautiful World wasn't the first adaptation of the novels by Keiichi Sugsawa, but it was nonetheless a stunning example of what the medium can do, and is highly deserving of a second season that will, in all likelihood, never happen. If that's a sentiment you can get behind, the continuation we deserve is here in the form of Wandering Witch: The Journey of Elena, based on the novels by Jogi Shiraishi. In the beginning, I was skeptical of whether this series would be worth the watch, as I am with more or less every series nowadays, but by the third episode, I was convinced this one was very special. Wandering Witch follows Elena, a young witch in a world where witchcraft and magic are commonplace. Inspired by a fellow witch named Nike, who traveled around the world and wrote of her adventures, Elena aims to take the same path. In each episode, minus the 1st, 10th, and 11th, she travels to a vastly different country and meets different people, some of whom can be called friends, some who could be considered enemies, and while her adventures can at times be called heartwarming and wholesome, there's a thin layer of horror that will send shivers down your spine at the implication. I compare Wandering Witch to Kino's Journey due to the shared story structure of a main character exploring the world they call home, but while they have vastly different backgrounds and motivations, the two heroes are also incredibly similar. Both Elena and Kino assume the role of an objective observer. Elena because getting involved will rarely benefit her directly, and Kino because she believes things are fine as they are without her involvement. In both cases, they end up getting involved, but it's clear their core philosophy is similar at the end of the day. It's rare that I look at the promotional artwork for a new anime and think, that's gonna be a fantastic series, but when it does happen, and my prediction turns out to be correct, ooh boy! That's exactly what happened in the case of Tonikaku Kawaii, adapted from the Kenjiro Hata manga. It's also a home run for Studio 7 Arcs, who, prior to working on this, was responsible for Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha and White Album, which failed to reach a mainstream audience. Tonikaku Kawaii follows Yuzaki Nasa, who almost immediately gets hit by a truck because he was rubbernecking, but where a legion of anime boys and girls failed to survive such a turn of events, he not only lives, but remains conscious long enough to ask the stranger who saved him if she'll date him. You know, like an ordinary, well-adjusted human. And for some reason, she agrees, but only if he agrees to marry her. You know, like an ordinary, well-adjusted human. He, of course, accepts the proposal before passing out from blood loss. Giga Chad Nasa stares death in the eye holes and says no, where the virgin Kazuya apologizes to death for the inconvenience. In any case, Tonikaku Kawaii chronicles Nasa and Tsukasa as they figure out what married life is like when you don't know anything about your significant other. It's super adorable with all the lewd hand-holding and enough blushing to release a bootleg Jeffree Star palette. The Gymnastics Samurai, the second series by MAPPA this season, asks a question that really didn't need to be asked because the answer is a resounding yes. Do y'all want to see an anime that crosses the wholesome father-daughter dynamic of Kakushigoto with a well-written sports drama following the rise and fall and rise of a gymnastics superstar? I don't normally dig sports anime, so this is another series where I wasn't convinced that it'd be for me until a couple of episodes in, when, I became emotionally invested in Jotaro's story, his pains, his desire to make his daughter and late wife proud, while coping with a career-ending injury and the stress of industry politics. It also has a brilliant OP and ED by Orange Range and Hatena respectively, both of which confidently stand up against both themes for Jujutsu Kaisen, the other MAPPA series, convincing me that someone on staff just has objectively good taste, as they were also responsible for Inuyashiki and that absolute banger of an OP. It's time to get on your motherfucking Nico knees and bow down, because Love-Live Nijigasaki High School Idol Club is here to expedite the transition from hard-working civilian to full-on degenerate weeaboo in 13 life-changing episodes. In this chapter of the compelling high school idol drama, we're introduced to Ayumu and Yu, who are turned on to the concept of school idols, but find their school's club has been shut down, so it's up to them, and all of their former members, to get it started again. In my opinion, this is a particularly interesting entry in the franchise, as where the original focused on Mu's joint efforts, this is a spin-off that centers more on the individual efforts of each character. It's a bit misleading as the OP showcases the entire club, minus Yu, performing together, but only once does that happen in the series itself. I think that's okay, however. Each of the solo idols wields a personality and flaws that set them apart, and if you're an existing fan of the franchise, you'll probably find at least one that you'll bestow the coveted Best Girl title upon. It won't change the objective reality that Rina is Best Girl, but I am content with letting you pretend. I think this spin-off is a suitable successor to the franchise, at least until the next mainline entry receives an airing date anyway. I wasn't a huge fan of some of the questionable character motivations towards the last couple of episodes, but they course-corrected before it became too problematic. I won't spoil it for anyone, but trust that it doesn't ruin the entire season for me, but it did make me do a double take and question what it was I was watching, if that makes sense. Sleepy Princess in the Demon Castle follows a narcoleptic princess who, when abducted from her kingdom by the nefarious demon race, decides to systematically tear the demons apart, inspiring the first ever instance of reverse Stockholm Syndrome. If anything has been made clear by this point in the video, it's that my patience is exceptionally lacking, as I very nearly dropped this series, and boy am I glad I didn't. I thought, at first, it'd be difficult to make a series about a princess trying to sleep and keep it interesting throughout, but having seen it to completion, I have a mighty need for more. It's a real shame, as Studio Doga Kobo isn't particularly known for sequels with a few exceptions, so the chances of getting a continuation by the same studio are slim at best. I would love to be proven wrong, however. I have an interesting relationship with Golden Kamuy. I have next to no idea what's going on at any given moment in the series, and I can only name less than a handful of characters, but damn if I don't enjoy it regardless. It's such a fun, action-packed series that's defied the odds and secured not only a second season, but a third as well. After that cavernous cliffhanger they left us with at the end of Season 2, Sugimoto and Asirpa are forced apart, the latter believing the former is dead, having been shot down alongside her father at Abashiri Prison. Sugimoto now travels with Tanigaki, Tsukishima, Goito, Chikapasi, and Ryu, while Asirpa now travels with Kiraranke, Shiraishi, and Ogata, two of whom are conspiring to use her in an effort to find the gold, and Shiraishi is Shiraishi. I won't go too in-depth as to the plot of this season beyond that, but trust that if it's Golden Kamuy, it's loaded with drama, hilarity, and a fair amount of twists that might not begin to pay off until the, hopefully inevitable, Season 4. In the before times, there were several instances where I was able to host a panel on my favorite anime studio of all time, Studio Shaft. I adore their signature style of animation, coloring, and staging that has become iconic in the 20-some-odd years since director Akiyuki Shinbo entered the scene. It's not as if their yearly anime slate was ever stacked. In a normal year, the titles produced could be counted on one hand, but it does seem as if their signature style has taken a dive in the time since 2019's Zoku Owari Monogatari. When I noticed they were working on an adaptation of a toy line, I was concerned, to say the least. Enter Assault Lily Bouquet, based on a mixed media franchise consisting mainly of a line of toys, light novels, and manga, following a bloated cast of wannabe waifus who are training to become warriors called lilies. In this world, lilies fight against gigantic monsters, unironically known as the Huge, with their specialized weapons called charms. It should also be noted that the lilies spend approximately 10% of the series actually doing that, while the other 90% is spent on slice-of-life Yuri escapades. Oh, did I not mention? Yeah, every single person in the cast is a very heavily implied lesbian, even the sole male principal of the school. In fact, first-year lilies can ask their senpai to become their shutsengo, which is sort of like asking them to become their big sister and reinforce their lily training, but everyone seems to treat it as if they're an item, so I guess some of them have sister complexes. I want to make it very clear. If it sounds like I have an issue with Yuri, I most certainly don't. I would actually suggest I am an aficionado of cute girls doing cute things as a cute pairing. I am a stan for cute girls falling in love with each other. I would even go so far as to say I am a Yuri trash can. I think the issue lies in that, even as a Yuri, Assault Lily Bouquet still isn't anything to write home about. It has far too many characters to root for anyone but the core group. In fact, that is something the creative team seems to be aware of, considering no matter how many episodes it's been, each character has an introduction placard with their name and school year, as if I'm supposed to remember each of these names and where they place in the web of drama. It kind of reminds me of My Hero Academia and how they, too, constantly reintroduce the class, but the primary difference is that the members of Class 1A aren't caricatures who vanish into the ether after their initial introduction, where that's exactly what happens in Assault Lily Bouquet. I'll be honest, the entire time I watched, I wondered, what happened to Shaft? I saw this one to completion only because I trusted their judgment and because the visuals were beautiful, but this was a path I did not expect the studio to take. It seemed that, with small exception, what I said I adored about the studio and their past work was wholly absent here. It was then that I learned the director was not, as is the custom, Akiyuki Shinbo, but rather Shoji Saiki, known for his work on the collaborations between Shaft and Gainax, Maharomatic, This Ugly Yet Beautiful World, and He Is My Master, which would certainly explain it. I feel like I'm being overly harsh here. It just bugs me when a studio I love and appreciate takes such a drastic left turn in terms of style. I did not hate Assault Lily Bouquet. I just really don't want to see Shaft continue on this path. If they were to start producing stuff like this on a regular basis, that would be heartbreaking. In a similar situation to Tonikaku Kawaii, when I saw the key art for Dropout Idol Fruit Tart, the thought went through my mind that this would be an incredibly well-made idol comedy, and for the most part, I was right. But not to the severe degree that I was right about Tonikaku Kawaii. Dropout Idol Fruit Tart is the unfortunate series that Anime Studio Feel decided to release after the beaut that was my teen romantic comedy snafu climax, so it's kind of an impossible task not to compare the two, at least on a subconscious level. It reminds me of when PA Works put out Sakura Quest, a ridiculously wholesome story about young women accomplishing their goals, only to follow it up with, Horse Girls. I will, that said, do my best to discuss this series based on its merits, independent of what came before. In this adaptation of the manga by So Hamayumiba, we follow the girls of Mouse House, a repository for terminally unpopular entertainers. A former child star who wants nothing more than to erase the reason for her fame and has a complex about her short stature. A model who's been blessed with large assets and has a complex about him. A musician who never seemed to take off and who just might be the only innocent person in the house. A new idol, Idol A, who's simply unable to get over her obsession with the moe aesthetic. And another new idol, Idol B, who's simply unable to get over her obsession with Idol A. In order to protect the place they call home and succeed together where they failed individually, they form an idol group, Fruit Tart, and do their best to produce an idol-based variety show in addition to writing and performing music. In my opinion, Dropout Idol Fruit Tart tried to stuff too much into its short runtime, resulting in what feels like a disorganized jumble of storylines. I think the premise of idols filming a variety show is interesting, but as we almost never see the girls of Fruit Tart filming said variety show, it feels like superfluous material that might as well have never been mentioned at all. In the last few episodes, the concept of the National Idol Championships is brought up, but it's never elaborated on in a way to let the audience care too much about it, and then the season ends. It could be that they would focus more on this in a second season, but given the state of the industry today, we will likely never see that happen. In the end, if you think of Dropout Idol Fruit Tart as anything more than a cute series about wannabe idols, you'll probably have a bad time. It's silly, mindless fluff, and sometimes that's okay. If you had asked me at the beginning of the season if Talentless Nana had the capability of becoming one of my favorite offerings of the season, I would have laughed, but here we are. It's quite strange that the series I initially disregarded as the discount My Hero Academia somehow managed to climb its way past other legitimately good titles like Gymnastics Samurai or Golden Kamuy, but here we are. It's also discouraging because while this series needs a continuation, the manga simply doesn't have enough material at present to make that remotely possible. Talentless Nana, the tale of a class of superpowered students who were training to defeat the enemy of humanity, is one that seems generic as it takes the tried and true main character is the only one without an ability and has to make up for it with hard work trope until it's not. It could be that you remember a couple of years ago how we had a hard time explaining what the Promised Neverland was about, as the entire premise was basically a spoiler, and the same can be said for Talentless Nana, so I want to abstain from going too in-depth with this one, but I will leave you with one piece of advice. Don't sleep on Talentless Nana. It's an expertly crafted mindfuck, filled to the brim with suspense and macabre, and if this video can convince even one person to give it a watch, it'll have done its job. I will definitely be picking up the manga in the near future. Jun Maeda, the co-founder of Key and creator of titles such as Angel Beats and Clanad, decided y'all hadn't cried enough, so he's back at it again with another stunning series, The Day I Became a God. It follows Yota Narukami, an ordinary high schooler who runs into Hina, claiming to be an omniscient deity, who informs him the world will end in approximately 30 days. It gave me heavy Mahoromatic vibes, especially considering the countdown clock before the end credits of each episode, reminding us of how much time remains until the inevitable end. If you have seen any of Maeda's work, you can rest assured that not all is as it seems. I won't say any more than that, as like with Talentless Nana, there's no chance I could elaborate on the story without ruining it, and that's the last thing I want to do. I do, however, want to warn you, this is not a series for the faint of heart. While the vast majority is slice of life, the last few episodes present a personal and extremely unfiltered look at mortality and the finite nature of existence. It's just another day in the office for Jun Maeda, I guess.
It just hit me how much anime I truly watched this season, and as I look ahead to winter and to all the second and third seasons that are airing, I have a bad feeling we'll have even more to discuss next time around.
What? No. I am only capable of watching so much anime before I vanish into the ether, never to be seen or heard from again. No, I'm not ready to go. No, I'm not ready to go. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. It has been a blast putting it together.
there's a lot that goes into these kinds of videos, so when I say a blast, I mean it's as if I'm being stuffed into a cannon and blast. As you can see, it's been a couple of days since I've done the majority of filming for this video by the haircut and different shirt. I actually got a Pixcelation shirt finally, so that's nice. But I don't know for sure if I'm gonna encourage y'all to get these yet because the picture didn't quite come out the way that I wanted it to. But whatever. If you want one, I will put a link in the description down below for you to get one from the Redbubble store. Just a couple of things before I let y'all go. So if you, we are actually trying to build up the Pixcelation Discord, which used to be known as the Cloister of Weebs shit. We've actually changed it to the Cloister of Weebs to be more welcoming to a wide audience, I guess. So if you want to join that Discord server, you will find a link in the description down below, as well as a link to the Facebook group if you would like to do that. We're trying to kind of build those up from nothing. So far, so good. There seems to be some moderate activity going on in there, and just discussion about anime games and anything else nerd related, really. As always, if you could, please, if you are not subscribed, which chances are you are not, please consider hitting that subscribe button, hitting the bell icon so that you can be notified whenever I make new content. It's not, if the past year is any indication, it's not that often, so it won't disturb your normal schedule. Of course, I think it would be good if it did. That would mean I'm making more content, but that's not the point. The point is that I would love to have your support. Go like me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you like those social media platforms, and yeah, and then also yeah. Here's another thing. Go follow me on Twitch, because I have been streaming a lot more lately, and I would love to see y'all over there. Now, I know it's a little inconsistent, I don't exactly have a schedule yet, but hit the bell icon over there as well, so that you can be pinged whenever I go live, and then, you can come watch me as I try and fail to play video games. That being said, thank you so much for watching. I will be back in a future video, and until then, this has been Pixcelation, reminding each and every one of you to stay pixelated.